In my restless dreams, I see that town. Tomato Town. Just kidding, it's Silent Hill. I love Silent Hill, a fantastic but troubled series. I can remember the very first time I seen it to this day. I was only a wee lad and I saw my brother playing it in his room. It was this dirty, grungy looking game that tickled my interest. So I started wandering towards the TV to get a better view, and soon I couldn't look away. I had no idea what was happening and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was used to playing Crash Bandicoot and Rugrats, so this was slightly different. I liked the unnerved feeling and terror pumping through my small stature, and I would chase those feelings for the rest of my life, becoming a big horror fan. The game was Silent Hill 3, and I wished so badly to be old enough to play it one day for myself, and when that day finally came, I was head over heels. It's very near and dear to my heart. I never cared about video games as much as these ones. I would, play them and finish them and then just toss them to the side and never think about them ever again. But these ones were different. I would always find myself going back to them, discover different endings and new things in the game. I only ever wanted the series to explode in popularity and be right up there with the other grandfather of horror, Resident Evil, which it somewhat is, but it will always be the little brother. Still, after 25 plus years, Resident Evil is more relevant than ever. Capcom has done a great job taking care of their series by remastering their best games from the ground up for new consoles and new generations to experience. And there's still new games in the pipeline as well. While the best Silent Hill games are harder to come by and stuck on old systems with no new main titles since 2012, leaving the series to be but a distant memory. But there is a reason for that, so let's talk about how Konami ruined Silent Hill. It was 1999 and time for a new Konami title. Fresh off the heels of the release of Metal Gear Solid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night, two absolute bangers that would go on to revolutionize their respective genres and games as a whole, while developing hardcore fan bases. This time Konami wanted to try something a bit different, and seeing the success of Capcom's Resident Evil 1 and 2, they published their very own horror title named Silent Hill, which was developed by Team Silent. A team was specifically crafted to make it that consisted of staff members that had failed at other projects and were going to leave the company. On paper, Team Silent had absolutely no right to succeed, but oh boy, they sure did, and Silent Hill would become an instant success. What was supposed to be a simple Resident Evil clone turned out to be so much more, and because of it being their first title, Team Silent had a lot of creative freedom with it, which allowed them to craft their brilliant ideas how they envisioned, without any pressure from other sources. The story follows protagonist Harry Mason, who is your regular everyman, looking for his daughter who's gone missing after a car crash. He's stuck in a bad situation of being in a strange town covered in fog with creepy monsters and a weird cult. A fun fact is that the devs actually used the fog to disguise parts of the map to get around the console limits of the PS1. A cheeky but genius move, because in the end, the fog would become an iconic part of the series. This game was special, a more cerebral experience to Capcom's zombie games. In Resident Evil, it presents a heroic narrative, combat-trained saviors who must exterminate the evil that is the zombies to restore order. In Silent Hill, our protagonist has no idea how to handle these situations, or even how to shoot a gun for that matter, which is evident in the game by him having bad aim and missing a few shots here and there. The game featured some puzzles, a couple were clunky and hard to work out, but others were very fun and rewarding. What really separated Silent Hill from Resident Evil was the inclusion of the other world, seemingly more dark and terrifying alternate reality of the world Harry is in. The walls and floors will strip away from paint and shift to a rusted, blood-drenched area with chains and corpses littering the surroundings, truly unlike anything seen in games at the time. The sound design too was perfectly crafted to fit the visceral horror of the game with sounds from everyday life, like construction site equipment, idling engines, dripping taps, bells and clocks, to create a twisted sense of familiarity. The game's development team set out to make a horror game that offered more than just jump scares, something shocking, unusual and transgressive, which it achieved hands down. Silent Hill becoming a success made Team Silent make a bold move with the next title, and focus less on the visceral horror for a more introspective horror with a much deeply layered, complicated story with a lot more emotional depth, tackling such tones as depression, sexual abuse, death and a lot more. Given that very few horror games at this point had attempted to craft a story good enough to be the main focus, this was considered a potentially crippling move. Unlike Silent Hill's protagonist Harry Mason, who accidentally ended up in the town following a car crash. The protagonist for Silent Hill 2, James Sunderland, willingly walks into the town after receiving a letter from his dead wife, Mary, who seems to be alive and can now be found at the town they used to vacation at. The beauty about Silent Hill 2 is that in any other game or even movie, this would be your typical guy rescues damsel in distress plot with a supernatural twist. But this story is complicated by the fact that James is a man burdened with tremendous guilt and depression. See, he killed Mary following her years-long bout with an illness that rendered her helpless, and forced James to forfeit his own life to become her caretaker. The brilliance Silent Hill 2's story exhibits is that it doesn't feel the need to tell you which conclusion is correct. Silent Hill 2 is a rare instance of show-don't-tell storytelling in gaming. We learn more about the otherworld and how things work in this game too. A journal from a doctor found at Brookhaven Hospital implies it lies on the border where reality and unreality intersect, a place both close and distant. It makes reference to the otherworld from an outsider's perspective. For the doctor, the otherworld is nothing more than an illness, which has the potential to reside in all people. The doctor is able to view the patient while he is in the otherworld, but the doctor is not experiencing it themselves. This is similar to how Laura appears to view the world around her. She is able to see James Sunderland, but is oblivious to the horrors that he is experiencing. People's worst fears get manifested here, but with a better casting this time, it really shows how different it is for everyone else. Eddie is someone who is self-conscious about his weight and physical appearance, after being laughed at and ridiculed his entire life, so he sees his demons as bullies in Silent Hill. During the cutscene before his boss fight, he sees James as a bully now too, and attempts to murder him. Maria is my personal favourite of the cast, and arguably the primary antagonist of Silent Hill 2. She's mysterious and seductive, and there is an argument to be made that she is a mental construct or a figment of James's seemingly delusional imagination. Like a dream character, she's often seen defying death and questions James's perception of whether or not her death actually occurred. She is virtually identical to James's late wife Mary. Physically, Mary and Maria have the same face and voice according to James, but their hair and clothes are different. James is shocked by their eerie resemblance, initially mistaking Maria for his deceased wife. Their similarities end where their personalities begin, however, as Maria's personality is far more sexually extroverted than Mary's. She's very flirtatious and dresses provocatively. Maybe she can finally release James from horny hell. It's a game riddled with symbolism and almost everything referencing James's feelings over the years. The guilt, the resentment, the sexual frustration, it's all in there. Pyramid Head is the personal hell of James, and he knows this himself. He correctly recognizes that this monstrosity exists to fulfill his need to be physically punished, which is why the creature killed itself at the end of the game, should James achieve remorse. Pyramid Head has rightfully become the most iconic member of the Silent Hill franchise due to the fact that its frightening design speaks loudly to a universal sense of horror. Artist Masahiro Ito described the heavy metal head, symbolizing the sheer weight of guilt James feels for what he did. The sexy nurses are also quite a standout, representing James's sexual frustration. From being stuck in the hospital around the nurses so much with Mary, it manifested into them having big cleavage and shorter uniforms, prompting cosplays and confused boners for many years to come. The level design was much better this time around, and with it originally releasing in the PS2, the visuals are a lot sharper. Along with the character models, the monsters themselves are a lot more interesting and detailed, making them feel far more unsettling. The puzzles are better here, but you need about a 200 IQ to solve them in the hardest difficulty, and the combat is just more of the same pretty much. The sound design again is on point, but this time evolving, being softened into something more somber to reflect the game's more intimate feel. Despite all this, however, back in 2001, when Silent Hill 2 had released, the reception to it was very mixed and divisive. Even within Japan, the most common sentiment was that the story was too vague and cryptic, and the game overall was far too much of a departure from the style of Silent Hill 1. Some fans are also upset that it didn't continue the story set forth by the first game, but like all good things, it takes time to truly be appreciated. It wouldn't be until many years later that the game would receive the hallowed ground reputation it has now. This is Team Silent's greatest achievement. Keep in mind this was 2001, and a bold change of direction. One of the greatest stories told in gaming, because it rightfully recognized the unique capabilities of gaming as a storytelling method and used them to craft a plot that reveals the basic fear of humanity is controlling our fears. Which is why it's one of my personal favorite games, and widely considered to be one of the best video games of all time. Following Silent Hill 2 would be no easy task, but sure enough in 2003, Silent Hill 3 would release. Development in the twilight of the PlayStation 2, using as much power as possible, and was carried out almost simultaneously with development of another horror title. The first and what would turn out to be the only game in the series that would feature a female protagonist takes place 17 years after the events of Silent Hill 1, and centers around Heather Mason, the daughter of Silent Hill protagonist Harry Mason. Vulnerable protagonists have always been a key in establishing horror in Silent Hill, with Heather being the purest installation of this. She feels so ordinary. Everything from what she says to how she acts has the feeling of being a regular teenager, and Heather Morse's voice work enhances all of this.
Enjoy? I feel like I'm going crazy. Does this place get to you at all?
Heather is my favourite protagonist. She has a lot more personality than the others in the series, and I think that's a real testament to how good this game really is. The main fears of Silent Hill 3 torments Heather, with that of becoming an adult and unwanted pregnancy. The game feels obsessed with motherhood and childbirth, which at 17 she doesn't want to engage with any of that, but she has a cult forcing it on her symbolically and directly through Claudia wanting to use her body to birth a new god. As a direct response to criticisms of Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill 3's entire game design ethos was based around countering criticisms of 2 and giving fans what they wanted. The story was born out of a response to fans wanting to tie up loose ends in regard to the first game, hence its function as a direct sequel, and as such the general atmosphere and visual aesthetic were more in line with the first game as well. More visceral than psychological, but there were still introspective elements throughout. Silent Hill 2's large emphasis on spending a lot of time wandering the streets was criticised, so the outside street sections in Silent Hill 3 were very minimal as a result, and the game switched to more claustrophobic indoor environments. 2's combat was criticised for being too easy and having little variety, so 3's combat was completely overhauled and a parry and counterattack system was introduced. More melee weapons were added, a body armor item was added, some beef jerky too which you could use as a trap for the dogs, among other things, and a dynamic health and ammo distribution system which would add or remove ammo and health supplies at certain areas depending on how much the player currently had in their inventory and whether or not they needed it. Masahiro Ito's monster designs carry on from what he started in the first game and are ramped up in terms of gruesomeness and bizarreness. While the iconic Pyramid Head is not in the game, there are still plenty of weird designs that, as typical with the series, are representative of the main character's thoughts. The environments are appropriately rusty and grimy as in the first game, and when combined with the scrapings and otherworldly noises, it really holds that isolating and nightmarish feel. You can't talk about Silent Hill 3 without mentioning the music. Akira Yamaoka once again takes the industrial and ambient sounds from the previous games, but this time brings in vocals. Many have fallen in love with the opening song, You're Not Here, with its melancholy vocals by Mary Elizabeth McGlynn. So yet another fantastic numbered entry and arguably the last glimpse at a true Silent Hill experience. Now comes the other game I mentioned being developed alongside 3, an oddball in the series and a point where most fans credit the start of the downfall, Silent Hill 4 The Room. Only being slightly linked to the previous titles, the main concept behind the new game structure was to take the safest part of your world, your home, and make it a danger zone. A great concept with poor execution, and you'll see why. It's actually not based on Silent Hill at all, but a similarly warped neighbouring town called South Ashfield, with a bustling urban environment complete with tower blocks, an underground metro, and tiny apartments with a kitchen shared living room space. It released 13 months after 3, topping the game sales charts in Japan during a video game sales slump, but dropped to 10th 1 week later. It drew mixed reaction from fans because it was more of a departure from the previous games. The lack of puzzles was a disappointment, especially with puzzles being one of the main triumphs in the series to date as far as I'm concerned. Instead of logic-based puzzles, they were now replaced with object hunts to progress. One neat thing 2 and 3 did was allow you to choose your game difficulty and your puzzle difficulty separate in the main menu, and 4 was thought to follow this tradition, but sadly it didn't, and it might seem minor, but imagine booting up the game for the first time, see that that option isn't there anymore. It was telling. Is it dumbed down? In terms of storyline, no. We follow Henry Townsend, who wakes up one day to realize that his apartment has been chained and bolted shut from the inside. All by himself inside the creepy apartment room, he tries calling for help but no one can hear him. Henry's only escape is through a weird portal-like hole that appears in his bathroom. Henry must go through this hole if he wants to get away from his apartment, which is slowly being invaded by an evil force, and must attempt to find an answer to who or what locked him in. The writing and the cutscenes are still up to the standard that we're used to, but outside of the desire to find out more of the story, it doesn't quite click like previous titles. We got one of the most memorable enemies in the entire series in the twin victims, while simultaneously getting one of the most annoying and obnoxious enemies in the entire series as well, in the invincible ghosts. Since you can't kill them, the best way of dealing with them is to just pin them into the ground so that you find the required item to do so. Perhaps the most alarming decision, and something of a cheap way of extending gameplay, was to recycle 4 of the same locations, so that forest section or subway section that you were having trouble with, get used to looking at it because you're going to be seeing it a hell of a lot. And the best part of it all is, the second time you go through these areas will be on an escort mission with Eileen, and you must pay attention to how much damage she takes, because while Eileen is with you, the amount of damage she takes can affect the ending of the game. But she has no health bar, so you have no help with this, making the whole thing feel completely ridiculous. Part of the fun of survival horror games is the exploration aspect, and to take that away from the player reduces the momentum and motivation, and makes the game feel padded out for no reason. You could argue that survival horror games often throw in added extras to make us play through them again anyway. Perhaps actually including that replay as an integral part of the game is a smart move, but however hard I try to let Konami off the hook, I just can't. The limited inventory is probably one of the most frustrating gameplay elements, and something that was not in the previous titles, so it feels like we're starting to go backwards here. With just 10 slots at your disposal, once you've armed yourself and picked up a few items, you're more than likely unable to pick up anything else, meaning an awfully lengthy trawl back to the room to drop off whatever you can in the item box. It wouldn't be so bad if items actually stacked, but they don't. So picking up the same 2 identical ammo clips or health packs and then taking up more than 1 slot is just so unnecessary. You can't drop items like at all, so you end up spending way too much time being a delivery man going back and forth between the item box instead of traversing the game smoothly. It looks and feels like a Silent Hill game, but it just doesn't quite hit like previous titles, and you can feel the noticeable downgrade, but things only get worse from here on out. After Silent Hill 4, we would never see Team Silent again, making fans wonder what happened. Every title after would be developed by Western developers, and outside the ever-loyal fanbase. Player interest just simply moved on, and even those fans had little interest in these titles. The series struggled to return to the early creative heights, and no matter how many titles flopped, Konami just kept churning them out. But let's be real for a second here. The post-Team Silent games mostly get ripped on simply by virtue of not being made by Japanese devs, which a lot of folks don't want to admit, but it is kinda true. Now that isn't to say these games don't have their own issues, because they absolutely do, with a wide list of them. So let's look at these games and see where it all went wrong. Origins is the first Western Silent Hill title. It was originally being developed by Climax USA and was a drastically different game than what the final product wound up being. Things were not going too well with the USA team, so development got handed over to Climax UK, who had less than a year to basically redo most of the game from the ground up. The original version of the game, as in the original developers, botched all of the original Silent Hill 1 characters, and the newer devs who made the retail version tried their best what they could to correct it. There's only so much they could have done. It's why you can notice so many inconsistencies with the game, with Lisa being the biggest victim of this. This is a direct quote from Climax UK team lead Sam Barlow talking about development of the game.
It was bizarre. It was supposed to be a dark comedy, and at some point, someone said Scrubs was the inspiration. We pushed back and said, look, if this goes out, it will be a disaster. There's a hardcore fan base. Konami's response was, you can change everything, but you've got to do it in the same time and budget.
The final story we got is a prequel to Silent Hill 1 with more of a focus on the trauma of our new protagonist, Travis Grady, while trying to fuse the cult and psychological aspects, but doing neither successfully. Sam Barlow even acknowledges that a prequel was a terrible idea, because the first game already tells the origin story, so there wasn't much room to maneuver. Personally, I am not a fan of 99% of prequels because we already know where things end up, and they just end up making things more convoluted rather than doing any good, and the case is no different here. The combat feels uninspired and the enemies can grab you and you get hit with QTs to escape. Yay! The game features odd monster designs, which are just more or less monsters from previous games tweaked to be slightly different. Like the Butcher, who's just Pyramid Head from Wish. One of the best things about this game is the puzzles, which strike the balance of being fun and challenging really well. Compared to previous games in the series, there would always be one crappy puzzle like the piano in Silent Hill 1, but there's not much of that here. Another cool element to the game is that when you interact with any mirrors, the world changes to the other world, which allows you to pick up key items, which adds a fun new dynamic to puzzle solving. The level design is more the same from the first 3 titles, but the Sanitarium is a place that I hate with a burning passion. What kind of sadist made that place with 3 floors and 2 worlds to navigate? I want to meet the person that designed that area. I just want to talk to them. In the end, the game lacks anything really interesting, whether it's Travis himself or the lack of any details regarding the story of Silent Hill 1, rendering a largely boring and forgettable experience. All things considered, it's not a bad game per se. What Climax UK was able to achieve in a short amount of time with limited resources is a great achievement. It hits all the notes of a Silent Hill game, and for some that might be enough, but I need more. And outside of the small improvements here and there, there's not much reason to revisit this versus doing my 27th playthrough of the older titles. Homecoming also went through a huge similar switch up mid-development. The original draft of the game's plot was pretty atrocious. It was going to be a DBZ style showdown between Alessa representing fire and Joshua representing water over Toluca Lake for some reason, despite Alessa's story being completely wrapped up by the end of Silent Hill 3. So the team got shuffled around and the original writers got booted, and the new ones tried desperately to salvage what they could with what little time that they had. The final product is a mess, with the story trying so hard to recreate Silent Hill 2, but missed all the things that made Silent Hill 2's story interesting and meaningful. The side characters are stereotypical and bland, and it also even copied the false memory twist. Pyramid Head ended up in the game for some reason, even though there's no explanation or reason for him to be there. He's just a series mascot at this point. It's a shame the Western developers could only really be bothered to piggyback off the Silent Hill 2. I would much rather and respect original storytelling. Most of this game's main focus is centered around copying other popular Silent Hill media, as if it's trying to take a checklist of things that people might like, and then it'll make the best Silent Hill game ever. It just adds a bunch of random things from other games that don't belong. It has some strange facial animations, bad voice acting, and even worse dialogue. They went for more action, horror, and combat focus, but somehow made the most boring combat in the series yet, because the knife stun locks everything, making it pointless to use any other weapons. You could tell it was trying to be the RE4 of Silent Hill. From graphics to gameplay, it was a mess. The puzzles are lackluster, and the levels kinda just want you to run in a straight line. The monsters felt really dull aside from some genuinely cool boss designs that were really creepy, and the music is good as ever. Akira Yamaoka does not miss. Ultimately, Homecoming feels like someone trying to imitate Silent Hill, which it is, and failing on all fronts. Shattered Memories was a solid revitalization of the series, albeit brief. It was a great game that revamped the psychological aspect, with the game literally interviewing you to find out more about you as a player. We turned around and implemented it in the game in all these various ways. I thought it was so cool that the game was always watching you, as well as responding to things that you focused on, and the way you engaged with the game as a player. It revamped the horror part too, taking away weapons and having the hiding thing only work as a temporary fix really made it feel more terrifying because you never got the upper hand on the monsters. It's a reimagining of the original Silent Hill, with the only things being in common names and places. Shattered Memories uses the framework of Silent Hill. You're a father searching for your daughter in a creepy town, but what happens in the game is completely different. There aren't puzzles exactly, and while you visit familiar locations, things that happen at them are not what happened in the original. The only story aspect that is the same is that you're searching for your daughter. It was made for the Wii, and it's one of the very few games that really utilised the new motion controls in a way that didn't feel entirely forced. There is no combat, no such thing as the Order or Alessa Gillespie, although there is a nod to the Order existing. Most of the Silent Hill characters are there, but they're repurposed or had a similar background and goal. It's sometimes regarded as the second most emotional Silent Hill, after Silent Hill 2 of course. Silent Hill feels more like an abandoned town. You can find abandoned belongings and voice messages, and like I mentioned earlier, the game actually tracks your behaviour. It will change your character's dialogue, clothing, and even places you can go to. It is more of a complete game, even though it too went through some developmental hiccups due to budgeting and not getting enough time granted by Konami to work on it, but there's not too much drama in regards to it. Downpour was rushed out to release a mandate by Konami. Are you sensing a pattern here? so the game shipped with a lot of technical issues that the developer sadly never got to fully resolve. The developer being Vatra Games, which is a team based in Czech Republic who had made one game previous to this, which was a Metroidvania platformer. Whereas Konami finding these developers, it's like they put a bunch of random indie developer names into a hat and draw one to make the new Silent Hill game. The plot of this game is actually original and pretty decent too. We follow a character named Murphy, whose past and story is compelling, a man consumed by revenge for his son who got abused and killed. Murphy commits a crime to get himself sent to prison on purpose so he can be closer to the killer and avenge his son. It's its treatment of other characters that leaves something to be desired. You're reduced to pressing a single button to flesh out his character. Press X to be good, press circle to be a dickhead. It almost felt like a bunch of side characters have reduced roles. The DJ was built up for a while only to be straight up erased from the story. The guy that ran the theme park and his whole arc was in this short section that feels strangely disconnected from the rest of the game. What we did get from Anne was pretty good. She was going through her own Silent Hill and you're left wanting more. The endings are even worse, so much that one of them ends up making the entire game make no sense. In a series known for having some truly gruesome and horrific monsters, Masahiro Ito's absence was felt more than ever with this game, having the weakest enemy designs in the entire series. The enemies are super bland and boring compared to what we're used to. The screamers take up what feels like 90% of fights. Speaking of which, the combat barely feels any different from the original Silent Hill, despite coming out in 2012 and all the technology advancements. It feels clunky and there's now a weapon degrade system. Weapons break after about 4 or 5 hits, which gets really annoying really fast. Releasing within the last year of the PS3's life cycle, you would think the game would look a bit better visually, but it's one of the most PS3 looking games I've ever seen. The character animations and the graphics are some of the worst in the series. I always think of that little girl in the monastery where her hair is like a helmet shaped object glued to her head. Unskippable cutscenes, which was the first time in the series that we ever had this problem. We got yet another Pyramid Head clone in the Boogeyman, fulfilling essentially the same role as Pyramid Head did in Silent Hill 2. So we got an enemy ripoff from Silent Hill 2 with the name ripped off from Homecoming. Okay, got it. It was a much more open world experience, but it was never capitalized on. There's an abundance of side quests out there for completionists that tell stories from other people in the town, but there's very little incentive ever to do them because you only ever get health and ammo for rewards. This would be the first game with our composer Akira Yamaoka doing the soundtrack, and you could really feel it. Instead, Daniel Licht would take on the role, who's best known for his work on the show Dexter, and he would recruit new metal band Korn, yes Korn, to help him create the theme song for the game. And so fans were left disappointed and heartbroken once again. This is Silent Hill now, and this would end up being the last brand new Silent Hill game that wasn't a remake or reboot for over 10 years. Only 6 months after release and 2 games under their belt, Vatra Games would announce bankruptcy. I would say it's surprising, but it's really not, as we know this isn't the first studio to shut down after a release. Konami gives these developers an impossible task, and when they can't execute it properly because they are not equipped to, they're the ones who face all the criticism and end up shutting down and losing their jobs, while the suits of Konami laugh it off. But somehow I'm still not done. We need to talk about the Silent Hill HD collection. Oh boy.
Check it out. Ah! Whoa, what's the matter? What the hell is that? A killer robot monster? Ah! Stewie, relax. No, Brian, you keep that thing away from me!
Konami decided to release it 1 week after Downpour and all around the same time as new AAA titles like Mass Effect 3, but it was plagued by more than just bad timing. It's hard to overstate the fans' love for these 2 games. The fanboy in me still gets bricked up when I play them. They are adored by fans. They deserved quality remasters that would allow the fans to relive memories and invite new fans into the fold, but all we got was an absolute dumpster fire. You know things are bad whenever they start using Comic Sans. As is often the case with Konami, it comes down to more than just rushed development or tight budgets. Unfinished assets, cancelled bug patches, unreasonable timelines, and more harm the development of the Silent Hill HD project, treating the series like some roadkill and just tossing it in a ditch. This is a direct quote taken from somebody who actually worked on the project but wanted to remain anonymous from an interview with Rely on Horror. From what I remember, Konami wanted to join in on the trend of HD remasters that were occurring in the PS3 and Xbox 360 at the time, and it was a quick and painless way of cashing in on some more. It's possible Sony or Microsoft even approached them about it, as Silent Hill was a key franchise owned by Konami US to go along with Metal Gear from Konami Japan, and so on. It seemed like a no-brainer since Metal Gear and Silent Hill were popular franchises from the 32-bit era onward. Just preserve them for the next generation consoles. With Konami eager to cash in on a budding trend, they handed the inexperienced developer unfinished code because they had thrown it away or lost it, and expected a polished HD version on a strict budget and deadline. Some things never change, classic Konami back at it again. The source also states that Hijinks was chosen because the management for both companies had worked together before with Konami, so there was a long relationship there. Hijinks Studios is a developer who worked previously with Konami on such classics like Haruki Revolution Glee 1, 2 and 3, and some other titles nobody's ever heard of or played, and with Glee being very similar to Silent Hill, they were an obvious choice. They had no clue how to deal with HD remasters like Iron Galaxy or Bluepoint. They had no expertise in revitalizing old games for modern systems, let alone rebuilding games from unfinished code. Konami really expected these inexperienced developers to remake 2 horror classics with broken code. Oh, those poor souls. Konami also insisted that new voices be recorded for Silent Hill 2 and 3, a choice that many fans still despise to this day.
I know a lot of you are getting kind of curious about the new voice performances, so here's a sneak peek.
Killing a person ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head. Pow!
Aren't you Maria?
I'm not your Mary.
So, you're Maria.
I am, if you want me to be.
Killing a person ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head. Pow!
Aren't you Maria?
I'm not your Mary.
So, you're Maria?
I am. If you want me to be.
To absolutely no surprise, the result, even after so long in development, was a buggy port full of crashes, frame rate issues and audio glitches. But Konami didn't care. When the project ran over budget and past schedule, Hijinks Studios was instructed to clean it up as much as possible for the launch in April 2012. You see, Konami had a genius idea to release the HD Collection, Downpour and Book of Memories all within the same month, called the Month of Madness, but instead it was a month of trash. It's hard to imagine why anyone would think releasing 3 games in the same series during the same month would be a good idea, but then again Konami is full of smooth brains, so I don't know. So there it is, the Silent Hill HD Collection began as one of Konami's many cash grabs based on popular trends. And so the game was just a giant mess, and soon after, Hijinks Studios was shut down. The fact is that every game in the post-Team Silent era went through development hell in some shape or form, and it prevented these games from being better than they could have been. I think the first 4 games are better purely on a technical level, but it's a shame we'll never get to see what these later games would have looked like if they had better budgets, better timelines, and higher team morale. Disappointment after disappointment, the series was in dire straits, but maybe that was all about to change in 2014. At Gamescom, a mysterious new horror game demo was announced, with some huge names at the helm of it. Hideo Kojima, the video game genius behind the critically acclaimed Metal Gear Solid series, Guillermo del Toro, award-winning filmmaker and Walking Dead actor Norman Reedus. Titled PT for Playable Teaser, this was a glimpse into what they were working on, Silent Hills. Was there finally hope? A word that would come to plague the fans of the series for years to come. With all these big names, it's gotta be a success, right? Could this be the revival that we so desperately needed? Well, we would get our answer shortly after this. Silent Hills was cancelled not even a year after its announcement, despite the universal praise, and it's still talked about even to this day. Sources say there was internal conflicts between Kojima and Konami. Kojima had been working on Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain for numerous years prior to Silent Hills, and whatever happened, Konami shut the project down. What a shocker. Kojima then said he would be leaving Konami along with his senior staff once work was completed on the MGS title. Will we ever really know what happened? Probably not. But I do have some interesting details to what Konami is really like. Konami's treatment of the entire Silent Hill legacy has been a series of questionable choices. The mourning fans of Castlevania and Metal Gear have found disdain for Konami in the last few years, coming to see the company as money hungry and willing to sell out their beloved franchises for a quick buck. Us Silent Hill lads know this side of Konami for much longer. Castlevania has been dead in the water for years, with the last major release being in 2014, only releasing pachinko machines on an iOS game since. And of course the MGS5 fiasco I mentioned earlier, which ended up releasing unfinished and ending Konami and Kojima's partnership. And then they have the audacity to release a Metal Gear game without his involvement later down the line, called Metal Gear Survive, which is ironically named because fans don't think Metal Gear can survive without him. Despite these, Silent Hill was the one that was done the dirtiest without a doubt. It really hasn't been the same since 2004 when Team Silent was last in charge of development. A common misconception is that they quietly just gave up after the release of Silent Hill 4, and then Konami just outsourced the franchise overseas. When instead, Team Silent were actually working on a Silent Hill 5 before Konami shut everything down, and the team vanished in 2007. Not much is known about this game despite it being fairly experimental, such as exploring the concept of a daytime variant of the Otherworld. Konami made the decision to outsource development in an attempt to freshen up the series, as the executives put it. Whatever the canned Silent Hill 5 was, the executives weren't liking it, so they got rid of it. Silent Hill 5 was confirmed in some interesting quotes from Kenzie Lamar, who was an artist for Double Helix Games who worked on Silent Hill Homecoming. Here's what she had to say.
Konami made all the decisions for the direction of the game, so if you didn't like it, you really should blame them. It was Double Helix's first horror game, and they were told to make it different from the previous games. The team at Double Helix was the most talented team of people I have ever worked with. They did the best with what they were given, and I am very proud to have been a part of the project. I am sure Team Silent could have done a better job, but they had already made 4 other Silent Hill games. I just wish they had given the American team the game before they decided to change everything. Most people just assumed the American team was to blame for all the changes, when the reality is that it was Konami that wanted the changes. Team Silent was making a Silent Hill 5 and it got canned in favor of what ended up being done. Konami wanted it to be different. It was more action-oriented. I was not a big fan of the way the other Silent Hill games played, so I think it's at least as good as they were, if not better, when it comes to gameplay. Story-wise, you really can't beat the first 2 Silent Hill games. Try it out. Silent Hill was never known for amazing gameplay, it was known for amazing visuals and story. The sales of Resident Evil are much greater than any Silent Hill game. We were told that over and over during production. We were forced to make it more action than survival. The whole time working on this, they kept wanting the game to feel more like Resident Evil. The core group of people working on it didn't want to do that, but orders are orders. Again, the fans can blame the developer, but in the end, it was Konami's choice.
With Silent Hill 4 not doing very well, and the fact that the series was much more popular in the West than it was in Japan, Konami decided to dissolve Team Silent and outsource the 5th game to an American studio of dubious experience. This is what started the trend of Konami hiring random inexperienced developers like mentioned before to make the next games, switching developers every other title and never settling on one. So for as much as Homecoming gets dragged through the mud, I don't completely blame Double Helix for how it turned out, because at the end of the day, Konami was the ones calling the shots. They seen how much better Resident Evil was doing with the action-oriented stuff and they wanted to emulate it, and effectively kill the franchise in doing so. So even with all we know about Konami so far, with the tight budgets, the rush deadlines, ruining development of multiple games, and then just milking the franchise for as much money as possible, it actually gets worse. In 2015, there was an article published by a Japanese business newspaper called Nikkei, when translated claims a decline in relations between Konami and its staff began in 2010, following the success of mobile title Dragon Collection. Its huge profits and low development costs caused management to rethink the appeal of the traditional games market. In a country where mobile gaming has exploded in popularity, the fact that Konami has pivoted to this style of offering isn't surprising. But what is surprising, however, is some of the office conditions that Nikkei reports have arisen as a result of the shift, especially with regards to how Konami treats its employees. There was allegations about monitored lunchtime usage and claims that the names of those who stay away from the office for too long are announced to the whole company. It also reports that there were cameras installed in the office corridors, but it wasn't for security, but rather to monitor the movements of the employees themselves. But that isn't even the worst of it. The Konami game developers who aren't seen as useful are reassigned to different jobs like security guards, cleaning staff, or even the pachinko machine factory. This has happened to junior staff but also senior staff who's worked on well-known game titles. Apparently one worker who announced their plans to leave Konami on Facebook started to have their posts monitored, and anybody who had liked the posts were reshuffled into other positions. Why is Konami acting like a crazy ex-girlfriend? Less than 2 years later, there were more allegations made in 2017. Specifically, this was alleged that Konami makes a proactive effort to prevent former workers from gaining new employment. Nikki was back at it again to report that a former Kojima Productions worker was told that their application to a job at a health insurance company that focuses in the games industry was blocked by the board chairman, who also happens to be a director at Konami. Furthermore, an application from Kojima Productions itself to join the health insurance company was also denied. Some companies apparently now employ an active policy of not recruiting former Konami staff just merely to avoid the issue entirely. It's also said that some workers will take jobs in other fields before trying to rejoin the games industry to shunt Konami off their resume. The report contains all manner of odd details, such as the fact that Konami staff who wish to participate with people from outside companies are allocated a temporary email that uses random numbers and letters to do so. The email is then terminated after a few months. Now, this information is pretty jarring, and it sounds like Konami is trying to treat their employees like prisoners. It also reckoned that the development cost of Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain in August 2015 had reached $80 million. GameSpot reports that the fallout between Kojima Productions and Konami has led to the senior staff having their access to services such as email, phone, and internet restricted. Kojima and his team were also largely frozen out of the game's pre-release hype campaign, all of which in fact did drive many of the team's senior members to walk away once the game was shipped, going as far as to remove the Kojima Productions logo from the official Metal Gear art and Metal Gear website, while references to the studio had also been pulled from some of the Konami corporate information points. What this really shows is that if Konami has a sheer lack of respect and care for its employees, the people who make their games, which makes them profit, then why would they care about the games themselves? So after 11 years of disappointing titles and the final nail in the coffin being the cancellation of Silent Hills in 2015, the only time we would hear from Silent Hill again in the next 5 years would be when Konami licensed the series for pachinko machines, which if you don't know is basically Japanese slot machines, gambling. But like I mentioned earlier, this isn't just Silent Hill. There are other big franchises like Metal Gear and Castlevania have also received similar treatment. So fans were left to take things into their own hands when they remade PT and PC, and also a group of fans came together to create a gorgeous enhanced edition of Silent Hill 2, with remastered graphics, audio, FMVs, and so much more. How the HD collection should have been handled. Konami never gave Silent Hill the love it deserves. With virtually no marketing, it only led to 9 million sales in the 20 years since its birth, which is astonishing compared to Resident Evil 2, which alone sold 12.6 million units as of this recording. I'm always drawing comparisons to Resident Evil because they are the other grandfathers of horror. They came up together, but they've always outshined Silent Hill. After years of being radio silent, the Mad Lads finally did it. In October 2022, Konami announced a Silent Hill transmission, which they announced 4 new Silent Hill games. So let's see what they are. By far the biggest announcement of the night was that we're getting a Silent Hill 2 remake, headed by Bloober Team, the Polish developer who gave us such games like Layers of Fear, Observer, and The Medium. In some great news, there was 2 original Team Silent members set to return, in artist and creature designer Masahiro Ito and composer Akira Yamaoka. This will bring upgraded audio and visuals along with some modern gameplay changes, including a switch to the currently trendy over-the-shoulder third-person camera angle, but Konami is supposedly keeping Bloober on an extremely short leash in terms of changes or new content. Bloober Team hasn't got the best track record, with a lot of people criticizing them for how they handle mental health in their games, so a lot of fans are skeptical. Next up is Silent Hill Townfall, which Konami describes as a co-production with Annapurna Interactive, who give us Stray, and multiple BAFTA award-winning No Code Studios, who give us Stories Untold and Observation. Otherwise, we don't really know what exactly this will be until we get more details, so on to the next one. Silent Hill F, a completely new story set in 1960s Japan featuring a beautiful yet horrifying world. The writer for this game will be Ryokishi07, I hope I said that right, a Japanese author famous for works such as the When They Cry visual novel series, which is nice and all, but the developer is the same behind Resident Evil RE-Verse and Resident Evil Resistance. Why Konami would look at the 2 least successful Resident Evil games in recent years and say, that's it, we need these guys to work on our game, is just another baffling decision. Lastly, we have Silent Hill Ascension, a new interactive streaming series where the entire community shapes the canon of Silent Hill. Coming from Konami, Genvid, Bad Robot Games, Behavior, and DJ2. Genvid CEO Jacob Novak explained the game as a new kind of Silent Hill that takes the feeling of a communal fear to a massive scale. He goes on to describe Ascension as a live, real-time interactive series, where millions of fans can watch together as a chilling story unfolds. He continues saying that players can change its outcomes and even be a part of scenes. I already have zero interest in this before it's even started. In addition to those 4 game announcements, we also got one final surprise. Director Christopher Gans, who brought us the original Silent Hill movie back in 2006, is set to return for a new movie based on Silent Hill 2. The first Silent Hill movie is not perfect, but it is a lot better than I expected it to be, so I'm actually really excited to see Christoph return and see how this one turns out. In another shocking turn of events, earlier this year, Konami announced a Metal Gear Solid 3 remake, which is huge, but what does this all mean? Is Konami back to making actual video games? Is Silent Hill back? Is Metal Gear Solid back? Well, let's not get too excited because as of the recording of this video, it is November 2023. It has been over a year since the announcement of Silent Hill 2 and we have no new information. They just dropped a trailer and dipped. Silent Hill Ascension actually came out recently and it is outrageously, unbelievably bad.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Downpour and Homecoming, I'm so sorry I treated you so harshly, please forgive me. The interface is cluttered and looks bad when overlaid over the video. The animations are super low quality and looks like a low budget indie title from 7 years ago. The fact that there's a battle pass for essentially a TV show, it'll take 4 days to resolve any decisions in game, the writing is bizarre, the chat has zero moderation or filter, people are spamming slurs and Kojima "Come in my tummy." It's absolute insanity. Remember the CEO of Genvid I was talking about earlier, Jacob Novak? Yeah, he hasn't taken too well to the criticism of his game and the pay-to-vote system too well. He took to Twitter to say, "There are criticisms that are valid and being addressed. Past puzzles, more free IP, which is the in-game currency. And there are criticisms that are invalid. Story narrative design." You know what, Jacob man? You're totally right. The story complaints in your story-driven product are just invalid. How dare they? This guy needs a PR team desperately. You can address and sometimes even disagree with negative community feedback tactfully, but this is not it. It is genuinely impressive to see Konami begin this new era with what is quite possibly the single worst game in the series so far. The franchise should have just stayed dead if this is what they think is acceptable. But hey, at least we can unlock the battle pass and get an emote that says "It's trauma," right guys? At this point, I already feel like it would take a miracle to make any of these games turn out well. The reality is that Konami is not the company they once were. I truly believe in my heart that there was once a strong love for video games and creating art to make something meaningful. But they've seen dollar signs and turned to pachinko machines and mobile games, trying to make money off their franchise's loyal fans in any way possible, which did more damage than any developer could ever do. Whether you know it or not, we owe a lot to this series. It's incredibly influential. From Stranger Things to every other tense, weird horror game that followed, from Dead Space to Soma, they all owe a debt to the craft of Silent Hill. It told the player that true horror is rarely out there in the fog, in the abandoned hospital, or even in the overgrown cemetery. It has been inside of us the entire time. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, I really appreciate you. I had a lot of fun making this video. It took a very long time to make, but I would love to do more of these in the future. But for now, I'm off to reapply my clown makeup. I will see you next time.
Such a shame. Here be monsters again. Here be monsters again. Surprise!
Oh, you guys.
Such a shame.